Hey everyone, what is going on? Welcome to the Shed Organics show, where we aim to inspire and enable more people to get into gardening. Now, today, my guest is Lauren from Oaklea Veggie Patch in New South Wales, and she's come to talk to us about a few principles around permaculture and family. Now, also passing on all of these wonderful lessons and experiences on to your children and to the future generations that will learn all of these principles and stay connected to the land that we all enjoy. Now, we went through many different things, and I think this conversation kind of is just the scratching at the surface of very many deep topics. And it would be amazing if you could all go and check Lauren out at her socials afterwards. But for now, enjoy the conversation with Lauren from Oaklea Veggie Patch.
Actually did veggie gardening, like my immediate family didn't do
wow,
that.
Okay.
But my Oma had very strong veggie gardening roots. And I have very vague recollections from probably about being maybe 5 or 6, picking zucchinis in her garden. That's
Beautiful.
the earliest memory that I can sort of think of that relates to it. And then from there, there's a bit of a leap to my sort of late teens, where I was sort of living in my own rentals with uni and that kind of thing, where I just had an urge to grow. So I literally bought packets of seeds, and I put beetroot seeds underneath a fern in the backyard with no success, because, you know, why do the research? You just put the seeds in the ground.
Exactly.
And yeah, so it just kind of evolved from there. And obviously, as I realized things weren't working, decided to figure it out and got a little bit better over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I just wanted to maybe double click on something that you just said before about this call to start growing. Do you have any idea where that comes from or why? Because that's something that I really, I guess, am noticing about certain people that I've run into in the gardening community. Just have this kind of calling to cultivate, whether it's flowers through to vegetables or anything like this. This urge to just help life grow. Do you think there's something there for you? What do you think about that?
Yeah. Since I was little, I've always been passionate about nature as a whole. I've always knew that when people ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was always something with animals or nature. I never knew what it was. And I'm fortunate enough in my professional life to work in the conservation industry now. And I have a biology degree. So this is all kind of intertwined throughout my life. The growing part has just kind of happened organically as, those elements of my life have merged together. I think with having your own roots, when you've got a permanent place as well, you just kind of naturally sort of, I guess, start to nest, for the lack of a better word.
Yes.
And that was how it kind of organically happened for me as well. It just was this culmination, I suppose, of, my inherent love for nature. And then that just extended over into my everyday life, and had those opportunities to get amongst that growing in that nature every single day. And, you have the benefits of growing food that doesn't have chemicals in it. You've got, a range of flowers that you can't access because you can buy seeds and grow them from scratch. And you're just opening up a different world. I think it just gets more and more exciting the more that you develop in that space. So, but yeah, to answer the question, it's stemmed originally from my love of nature and has just, encompassed everything.
And is that a family thing? Because that seems like, again, an environment, nature nurture type situation, maybe. Just
Absolutely.
The environment that you're brought up in. I, I was the same, very much brought up in sort of rural settings where it was almost celebrated to cultivate your own things, and we were encouraged to kind of sort of go into the garden and go and collect some things for your meals or whatever it is.
Yeah,
And
awesome.
I like how you said something about nesting, like it, as you said, lack of a better term, but you sort of you set up your little environment and you make it your home. And
That's right.
I think for some of us, it's something that you work on over the years. You kind of you have little projects going here and there, and for some it might be renovations or whatever. But for a lot of us, it's the gardening and making the environment that we're living in feel very natural and
Yeah, and
symbiotic.
homely.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
So if that's coming
Yeah.
from your sort of essence of growing up in nature and you're sort of naturally mimicking that as you get older and get more interested.
Yeah, absolutely. Both my mum and dad are very big nature lovers. And my stepmom is Indigenous as well. So there's, a lot of that connection to the earth and to nature. I do have a lot of memories with my dad growing up. He lived on a property where we lived on the central coast of New South Wales. And, he would do anything for an injured animal, or if there was a diamond python crossing the road, he'd stop and make sure that he got it, or a turtle, or he's still like we still talk about the birds that we see on our property. Every time I speak to him, he'll stop and say, can you hear the glossy, the yellowtail black cockatoos overhead, and those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely that is genetic, for sure.
That's so
Yeah.
cool. I love hearing stories like that because that's I think what's almost getting missing or going missing, sorry, in this future generation that we seem to be moving away from connection to the land and losing that appreciation, as you say, that's passed down and shown and it's demonstrated by our parents and our families and saying like this is how we
Yeah,
look after the land that looks after us. So
for sure.
yeah, I absolutely love that. I think that's really cool. And then was much of your family upbringing, I suppose, teaching some of these methods and mindset as well, or is it something that you, as you got into, you started doing, like you said, do more research and then kind of learning the
Yeah, I
ins and
don't
outs
think it
of?
was intentional by any means. I think it was just, when you become a parent, you want to expose your kids to as much as possible. And I think that's what it felt like. It just felt like, right, this weekend we're going forward driving, we're going to, test the car's limits, we're going to go to this mountain and we're going to see this, or we're going to stay at home, we're going to build sandcastles today, you're going to see how many lizards you can find in it. Just kind of, it was just a day-to-day thing. You sort of, as a parent, always trying to think outside the box of things to do for your kids and expose them to new places and that kind of thing. That's what it felt like. It didn't feel like teaching per se. I think my style of parenting now is a lot more teaching because, like you said, there's that sort of somewhat of a disconnection. I'm hoping we're on the cusp of that now. I feel like there's a bit of a change happening. I feel like there's a lot more awareness, particularly with like little veggie gardens in schools. There's a lot more Indigenous knowledge being passed through schools and that kind of thing as well. But definitely with my teaching style with my kids, I do find myself actively, trying to drum into them like this is how you plant seeds and this is
Yeah.
how you compost, and it's not as organic as I would like. I can probably tone it back a bit, but as well, I just want them to, be completely absorbed in this, environment and learn as much as possible, know where your food comes from, learn a few of those core, permaculture principles, and yeah, live as ethically as possible. That's my
Yeah,
goal.
I absolutely love it. I'm all for all of that, and that's a lot of the reason why I wanted to ask you to come on and have a chat, because it's very evident from your content the kind of message that you're putting out there, and I think that's awesome to highlight, and then and to like kind of dive into a few of these topics with you. You covered a few really amazing ones there as well, both with the kids and bringing them into that environment to learn, and then also like this permaculture sort of full circle mindset. Um,
Yeah.
is we'll start with maybe like your role as a mum, and then in the garden, and um, it's a fine line to walk when you're trying to introduce your kids to something that you like, because you don't want to kind of go too hard where they go, "Hey mum, this is not cool," like you're just
Yeah,
going
that's
too
right.
hard, or like kind of not showing any interest at all. But I think personally, I see a lot of mimicry in children. So you're setting the example by going out there every day and tending to something, or um, you know, yeah, just giving life and feeding back to the family, and showing up basically
Yeah.
every day. And that's kind of demonstrating that behavior to them, more
Yeah.
so than going, did you know this about your capsicums? And they just kind of go, oh, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you
Yeah.
hit the nail on the head there, particularly with kids under 5. They're definitely, like you said, they mimic behavior, but they also respond very well to rewards. And
Right.
by that, I mean the garden is the reward. So I didn't know this when starting off. I just was hoping that both my kids would follow me, love it, do what I do, be in there for hours. But the reality is they dig one hole, they plant one seed, they're done. They're off chasing butterflies and lizards,
Yeah.
and that's awesome as well. But I did initially get a little bit frustrated, like, oh, why aren't they engaged? But again, it's exposure, repeated exposure, and then they start to realize that they can eat from the garden. So
Yes.
they watch these things grow. Anything that's fun that they can pull off a vine, like snow peas, sugar snap peas, beans, anything they can pull out of the ground, like carrots, are always a big favorite. So they
Yeah.
know now, as they get a little bit older, that if they assist with the garden in the early stages, then they can, get those rewards later on. But yes, I've definitely found that it's more about, the lifestyle that they see me presenting to them on a daily basis. And I am very proud that I can provide a plate full of food at the end of the day. So we do talk about it at the dinner table. I'm like, this is what I do it for, guys. Like this is my why, presenting this
Yes.
to you for you to eat, that where it came from, how it grew, that it took 6 months sometimes to grow
Yes.
this. So they're the kinds of things that that's definitely not necessarily me teaching, but that's from a place of being such a proud mum, being able to do that, and teaching them that hard work pays off. It's not just me sort of, wanting them to come out and, learn in the garden and have a bit of fun, but it's learning that if you work hard enough at something, you can, reap the benefits from that hard work. There's a lot of elements to it, but at the
There
end of
really
the day,
are.
you nail on the head. It's exposure. It's just that repeated pattern of showing them how you
Mm.
want to, show them that way of life,
Yeah,
basically.
it's very admirable. It's awesome. I really
Thank
enjoy hearing
you.
that. Another part of that I think that I wanted to kind of highlight as well is maybe the struggles of trying to do a garden. So as you said, like sitting down there and being able to go, hey, like these tomatoes took 4 months or whatever it is, and or whatever the produce is, and last season they got completely eaten by bugs, or the weather was too bad and we lost the
Oh, yeah.
whole lot, and we don't get that crop at the end. So
Yeah.
how do you kind of deal with those problems, and then how do you kind of relay that to your kids?
Yeah. So gardening is definitely not for the faint-hearted sometimes, especially, I call where we live the Wild West. Especially our property, which has like paddocks on the outside, sort of like a ring around our house yard.
Wow.
Um, and I mean, we have fruit fly. A lot about
Hmm.
fruit fly living in Queensland.
Yes. Oh, yes.
That is a massive challenge for any kind of fruit during the spring and summer period here. Um, you've got every bug you can think of, white cabbage moth, caterpillars and locusts and green veggie bugs. Oh God, the list goes on.
Yeah.
Then you've got weather, La Nina. We had 2 years of La Nina where I couldn't get a single pumpkin
Mm.
flower to pollinate, so no pumpkins. Like it certainly is challenging for sure. Sometimes initially, when some of the problems are big and they're, on top of one another stacking, I get defeated and I have to take a moment away from the garden, recalibrate and figure out, right, what can I do here and reassess what I had originally planned. There are definitely ways around them, but you need to step back and take a bit of time. Sometimes that might be, resting a bed that you had an ideal hope for. It might be a different strategy. I've come up with a different strategy for dealing with nutgrass in a bed that I had potatoes growing in. I can't grow potatoes in it anymore because the
Yeah.
nutgrass grows through the potatoes.
Yeah.
So I grow pumpkins in that now because nutgrass doesn't like shade.
There you
So that
go.
works phenomenally. So it's taking a moment, feeling the disappointment, which happens all the time, and the kids, you know, they see it. They know what the
Mm.
caterpillars do. They see the damage, but at the same time, even though I express to them my frustration and concern, I think the biggest thing is we are then able to give that produce to our chickens. And so what becomes, a sad and disappointment for us is then a highlight for the chickens. So it
That's
becomes
cool.
this full circle of, yeah, let's have our moment, sit with it, be disappointed, but let's find something positive. Because I don't want to gloss over the fact that things can be disappointing. That's not
Yeah.
life, that's not reality. And with gardening, it genuinely happens weekly, if not daily
Yes.
sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want them to be resilient, and gardening, it definitely builds that. But our dogs love a lot of veggies too, so we'll give them some of the rotten stuff and the chickens, and then whatever doesn't go to them goes to the compost. So it's a full circle of using that waste anyway. It just means that we don't get that produce. But so yeah, it's sitting with it, feeling it, and then finding a solution, or just acknowledging that that didn't work. Let's just have a moment and move on. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That the ability to adapt and to kind
Yeah.
of just, yeah, think on your feet and also work with, it's like a dance, really, isn't it? You're sort
It
of
is.
dancing with the whole flow of
Yeah, because you
this
never know what you're
thing.
going to get, weather-wise and
Yeah.
bug-wise.
Yeah, yeah,
Every
exactly.
season is different.
And especially, I've heard, I mean, I don't know your experience, but from what I've experienced and others I've spoken to, even in the last couple of years, we've seen some very odd things thriving in
Yes,
wrong times and
that's
vice
right.
versa. So it
We
just
have
means,
to.
yeah, we just have to adapt and kind of go with what nature is planning for us, I suppose.
That's right.
Yeah, and that
Yes.
does it does teach your kids to really think on their feet and be adaptable and stuff like that. Um, let's chat a little bit about that whole full circle permaculture kind of thing. So a lot about what I'm trying to inspire people to do is to make the switch into actually starting to grow something from
Yeah.
just thinking about it. So a
Yeah.
lot of people go, "Oh, that sounds really nice," and then especially like if we visit people like your Instagram and we see this amazing produce that you've got, um, it's it's easy for people to go, "I really want to do that," but then they might try and, as we say, they come up against these pitfalls and struggles, and then it can be very very disheartening. So what I'm trying to do is get into the mindset of teaching people this full circle approach and trying to bring it together on any kind of scale. So that's the difficulty really, and the challenge, I
Yeah.
suppose, is trying to bring this mindset of being able to recycle everything within a enclosed loop system and be able to do it for, you know, whoever down living in a little apartment block or something and just has a small balcony for veggies and things. So we've got a couple of things that we can kind of bring into this, which you mentioned before. So we have the vegetable production, or the flowers, growing things, basically. You then have your animals that you can keep. Okay. I've seen some people, they've got quail on their balcony, but you know,
That's
people
ambitious.
it's ambitious, isn't it? And then there's things like guinea pigs and things that can, you know, process stuff for you.
Yeah.
And then you can have a small compost system, and a worm bin, something like this, and have some sort of closed loop. So,
Yeah.
do you mind just telling us a little bit about your system and how you have adapted your system to basically try and close the loop on your property?
Yeah, absolutely. I love everything that you just said, and I am of the same opinion and stance, I guess. I don't think it matters what your situation is, whether you live in an apartment or a small suburban block, or you're renting, or you've got a property. I just encourage people to give it a go. Doesn't matter what your situation is, you can always give it a go. You know, there's I'm probably digressing now, but from an affordability point of view, there are free seed libraries where you can obtain, you know, free seed to get
Yes.
started. Um, and you just need a windowsill with some sun to start. You start with, you know, or even, you know, Woolies sells those basil that are already in pots
Yeah.
ready to go. So
Yes.
you know, use a little bit, put it in a pot, and you've got your first plant to grow and keep growing. So there
Exactly.
are ways to absolutely get started. But yeah, so we had a suburban block before we have our property. So we're on 2 hectares now.
Amazing.
And before that, we were on like a fairly large, like suburban block in Newcastle area. And we had just a standalone compost bin. So anything, any food waste that we had, the dogs would get some of the appropriate food for dogs. And then our second option after that was compost. And then third option after that was the green bin. And now that we're here, we have a lot more space. We've introduced chickens into the mix. So we have 3 large bays of compost out the back now, which were all made out of recycled pallets. My husband
Beautiful.
made those, very handy.
Good on him.
Um, and so all of our food waste goes to the chicken buckets first, and then whatever they don't eat gets scraped up and put into the compost. And then obviously anything that's suitable for the dogs gets, you know, they love carrots and zucchinis and all
Yes.
sorts.
Yeah.
So they get their fair share as well. And yeah, from there, it just composts down and goes straight back into the garden. So we have very little waste in terms of, yeah, any vegetative material like that's in the gardens as well. We always try and find a use for that. Our deciduous trees are just amazing at producing that, you know,
Yeah.
that gold leaf matter for composting,
Beautiful.
and hedging. Any plants that need hedging, all of that just goes straight into the compost. But yeah, if you don't have a large scale, there are tabletop little compost systems that you can buy for apartments. Yeah, there's just so many options for all levels. It doesn't have to be, you know, what we have. It's just doing enough research to know that there is an option for you. You don't have to have chickens or quails on a balcony.
Yeah.
That would be very cool.
Yeah.
But yes, there are options for everyone, and giving it a go. That's my biggest message. Is there's anyone living anywhere can try, and that's where you've got to start. Like I mean, I started with beetroot seeds under a fern, so No, we've all got to
Yeah.
start somewhere.
That's it. You've got to take the first step. No, I really love all of that message. That's beautiful, and I think a lot of people will benefit from that because it is just understanding that you don't actually have to have a big property, and
No.
it can be done on any kind of scale. I think it's more just thinking about that whole regenerative and recyclable, cyclic whole system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we're just trying to, waste not, what not. That's that kind of saying, like that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
um, one thing I did really want to touch on with you is your amazing sourdough, which I've seen some pretty cool pictures of. Like, tell me a little bit about why sourdough. Like, what's the interest, or is it just absolutely delicious and that's why?
I can't even remember what triggered me to start it, to be honest. It's only been about 2 years, so I'm fairly new in the world of sourdough. But
Well,
I think,
your sourdough looks amazing. It looks
well,
really
thank you very
delicious.
much. It's absolutely a work in progress. It's not perfection by any means. I mean, I look at the professionals and I'm like, oh Lord. But no, I think having moved out here and having a little bit more time with my son and my daughter before she went to school, I think it just came naturally with wanting, to produce more of my own food. I think all the preservatives that you see in bread and, all
Yeah.
foods really. I'm certainly, we eat a lot of the stuff that you shouldn't eat. We're not perfect in that matter, but if there is a way that I can produce something that reduces the amount of plastic, like buying bread, if I can make my own and reduce that one thing, and get my kids onto it, that's amazing. But also, there's a lot of benefits for gut health with that fermentation process of sourdough.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a kind of a consideration with, doing it and thinking about food that my kids eat.
Yes.
Um,
I
but
totally agree.
also it's a challenge.
Sourdough's, yeah, I mean, I was going to say that it's a
That's up
challenge
to
in
the
itself,
challenge.
but it's, yeah, a lot of the reason that I, switched to trying to find a nice sourdough was for those health reasons in the preservatives and things like that, and having some
Yeah.
fermentation as it's very good. But yeah, I just really had to touch on how amazing your sourdough looked because it's just,
Thank you.
yeah,
It's it's
it's
a
a cool
it's
thing.
definitely a labor of love. It's a lot of, yeah, you don't realize how much changes through the seasons that affect your bread making. You think you've got it down pat, and then summer comes and your bread's risen within an hour, whereas winter it takes nearly 24 hours. Like it's just massive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's really interesting working with the culture as well, like the starter. I'm not too clued into it, but I've heard lots of stories where you can sort of like split the starter and sort of share it with people and things like this,
Yeah, which
and
I have done. Yeah, my
yeah,
starter's called Rudy, and it's had, I think, about 4 or 5 babies now. So it's off
that's
it's off
great.
doing its thing in other families, which is great.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. And I heard a story once that someone had basically taken this one from someone's old recipe and then took it around the world and then came back and found the original starter and they combined that together. And it
Wow.
was apparently something like it just came back, like it was like, oh, I remember you kind of thing, and just sort
No
of came back together.
way.
Very, very,
That's incredible.
as you know, I don't know very much, but it sounded very fascinating.
Yeah, there's some incredibly old starters out there. There's a lot of social media groups for people who are sourdough bakers, and some of the people's stories on there have, starters given them from great grandmothers, that they've
Yeah,
had dried or that they've just continued baking throughout their lives. Like I just think that's
it
amazing.
really
Mine's
is.
only 2 years old, so absolute baby. But yeah, it's just an amazing concept, really.
It is, yeah. And as you say, it's another challenge. It's something else to kind of grow and foster and get good at, and skills to
Yeah.
develop and learn. It's all within
Yeah.
this same concept, which is great. So I've got two things to just touch on just before we kind of round out. The first one is a question that I ask towards the end of every interview, which is just nice and simple. Your easiest and hardest crop to grow and why that might be. And then we'll go into the next one after. So yeah, it's hard to think off the top of your head, but that's the kind of the point of the question.
Well, it changes by season, doesn't it?
Yes. Let's just go overall the whole year. So any crop that comes to mind that's either the hardest one or like the easiest just goes everywhere.
The easiest has got to be zucchinis because the seed is large, so it's easy to sow. Once they're up, I find that they just need very small amounts of love. Like they're pretty hardy. So for most people, they're easy to grow and they're just so abundant. As you know, they just, as soon as they get going, you've got zucchini for months.
Yes. And if you leave them, they're enormous.
Yeah, well then you end up with one this big and you'll be feeding them good. So, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing, I think if you're growing from seed, tomatoes can be a challenge to start with from seed. But funnily enough, the two things that I probably shouldn't have struggled with over time are cucumbers and beetroots.
Okay.
Beetroots because I'm probably still trying to grow them under ferns.
Yeah, under ferns, I was going to say. Yeah.
It's strange though, isn't it? Some people can grow easily and what you can't sort of grow. I don't know why that is. But
this is why the question. Yeah, because it's such a good insight into everyone's little struggles, basically,
it is.
and wins as well. It's interesting that you say zucchini yes, but cucumber no when it's relatively similar.
Yeah. I can't answer that.
Because how do you? So you have no troubles with powdery mildew or sort of airflow and things like this in your zucchinis, or?
It depends how you water. I try and avoid watering on the leaves to start with.
Yeah.
The milk thing has never worked for me.
No,
so
neither.
I do prevention over the
cure.
treatment. So as long as I can keep it off, sometimes La Nina happens and you bug it. Doesn't matter what you do, you're getting powdery mildew. But I just try and water underneath, and it seems to keep it off. Yeah.
And are you trellising up any zucchinis or lifting them up at all, or are they sitting just on the mulch or something like this?
I haven't yet, but I will be this year for the first time.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. It's something
Watch
yeah, exactly. Watch the space.
Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. Look, it's been a real honor and amazing time to chat with you and get a little insight into your whole story and see some of the stories behind what I've seen on your social media. So if people want to go and find you, if they haven't discovered you already, where's the best place to show you off?
Yeah, probably Instagram, which is Oaklea_Veggie Patch. That's really the only place I'm showcasing.
Cool. No, that's all good.
So yeah.
Yeah, no dramas. Yes.
Say hi.
I think so. I think we should send as many people there as possible. I'll link, of course, all of your links and everything, and people can go and check it out. So thanks you so very much.
For having me. No, I appreciate it. It's been great.
Pleasure. Okay, there we have it. Thank you again to Lauren for joining us. That was a very enjoyable conversation, and we certainly dived into a few very important topics. Now, as I said earlier at the start of the podcast, make sure you go and check out Lauren and all of her social posts, because there's some really good information on there and some inspiration to get into the garden. Now, talking of getting into the garden, if you have not ordered your number 1 or number 2 blend, the fertilizer, it is now time to be fertilizing your garden for spring. The growth is already kicking off here in Queensland. So make sure that you order yours today via our website, and you can get 10% off for your first purchase. So get into the garden, get inspired. Thank you again very much for listening. If you could share this with your friends, if you enjoyed it, that would be amazing to help more people get inspired and get into the garden. So till next time, thanks again for listening.